Hello, everybody, and welcome once more to Human Rewild. And this is the second. This is the second in a series of sessions I'll be doing on sex and relationships, and follows up from the first question and answer session that I held a few days ago on open relating. I felt it was necessary to have a second session because, to be honest, you could speak for quite a long time on this subject. It's very deep, very rich, lots of potential questions and many different aspects to explore. And in my experience, that's one of the most beneficial things about this style of relating, is that it invites you, encourages you to go very deep with yourself and to clarify many, many different aspects of who you are and how you move through the world. So it puts you in all kinds of quite challenging situations, and time again, it encourages you to turn your attention inward, to really feel what's happening for you, to tune in with yourself deeper and deeper, and to clarify the entirety of your being, so that you can then be clear with somebody else in your life about the sort of relationship that you're in. So it is an immensely deep and varied and rich and rewarding topic. And so at the beginning of this session, I feel to speak a little bit on the style and the type of communication that you would have with a partner that you're in an open relating with. Because again, it's going to vary massively from person to person, and it's all about putting yourself in new experiences, testing and stretching yourself, going through that process of looking deeply within, tuning in deeply with yourself, to identify how you want to do things, what you are and what you are not okay with, and then communicating that as clearly as possible, as early as possible. And I feel like saying that with all of these things, the one thing that ties everything together in the universe is impermanence. So it helps to bear in mind that when you come to an open relating, or even from within an open relating, you have full freedom and autonomy to make a change, to request a change. And that can happen very quickly. You can think and feel one thing a previous day, and the following day some new sense of understanding or knowing arrives in you, and you have a realization, oh, this aspect doesn't quite work for me anymore. I need to communicate to my partner that actually I want to make a little change here. So, like with so many things in life, communication really is absolutely key. And it is an ideal that I hold in particular with open relating, and just in general with all my relatings, that it's of utmost importance to be as communicative with people as possible. And that calls on higher levels of courage, of honesty, of authenticity, but particularly in the context of being in a relating with somebody, communication is of utmost importance. And that involves, once you have something that you want to communicate, not sitting on your hands for fear of how it might land, not procrastinating or delaying. The moment it becomes real for you, the moment it becomes your truth, then the earliest you can communicate that, the better. So it's one thing to think of if you're considering entering an open relating with somebody, is how is the communication going to work, and particularly how is the communication going to work about other people coming into the relating, because that is obviously a large aspect of open relating. Now, for some people, they might want to know all the detail. They might want to know when their partner is interested in somebody else. dating somebody else, having sex with somebody else. They might want to be kept in the loop all of the time. And I know in some instances in this style of relating, some people will set up a fortnightly or monthly deep dive style check-in with each other, where one of the things they'll discuss is what's going on with any other potential partners that you have, or what's going on with any other partners that you do have. And again, it's important for each individual to go on their own journey and their own process with this. And so I'll share a bit of my process around this particular topic and where I've arrived at now. So initially, when I got into open relating, I wanted to know what was going on. I wanted to know all of the detail. And for the first 6 to 9 months for me, my partner wasn't with anybody else. But I was going through this process of just being a bit overwhelmed by all the potentiality, all the many different junctures and moments where something could happen. And also, I knew that she did still have a lover overseas. And there was one occasion where she went back to Portugal, where this person lived. And so again, I was just sitting with all of this sensation and potentiality, and my mind was taking it and running with it and creating quite a lot of different stories. And my way to try and have some kind of control, I suppose, over that was to ask a lot of questions, was to expect to be kept in the loop about what was going on. And it took me about 6 to 9 months to get to a point where I realized that I didn't really want to know all of this detail. I didn't really want to be told everything. What was happening for me was more a kind of control mechanism, and it was also an interesting process whereby I was judging this other person and trying to pick holes in their character, and also making some sort of comparison so I could say to myself, oh well, it's okay because in some sense I'm better than this person, or I can see flaws in this person, so therefore I can feel somehow better about where I'm at, and I can be dismissive of this person and perhaps dismissive of the connection that my partner has with them. So it was a really interesting process in the ways in which the mind will try to come up with contorted logic and comparisons and all kinds of other mechanisms to try and make you feel better about a situation. And sometimes, depending on your mood, how you feel, sometimes to almost poke at you and make the situation feel worse. Minds can do that too. It's a very interesting process. So initially, I wanted to know everything. Initially, I wanted to be told when there was a new love interest, when there was dating, when my partner took a new lover. But over a period of time, that changed, and it changed quite rapidly, not rapidly, drastically, in the other direction. And so the point that I've arrived at now is that I really don't feel I want or need to know anything about who my partner is seeing. Now, there is a big caveat to that, and I make this clear to everybody that I'm interrelating with. It's my personal preference not to really ask, not to know, and not to require the other person to tell me or keep me up to date with what's going on. But at the same time, I make it clear that if my partner wants to, if they feel that it would be supportive, if they are going through a particular process, having a bit of difficulty and want to speak on it, to have a bit of a soundboard, to ask questions, anything like that, I make it absolutely clear that I'm available for that. It's not that I'm saying I don't want to know anything and you can't tell me anything. I don't want to hear anything about it. It's just expressing my preference that I don't feel I need to know anything. I don't particularly want to know anything, but at the same time, if you feel it's supportive of you and it's something that you want to express, then I am absolutely available to that. Because I don't want to create a sense that these kinds of things can't be spoken about. So that's just where I've landed my own personal preference with this. And again, it's come from navigating many different situations and circumstances where this kind of thing arises, and coming to my own preference on the matter. So I can see that there is a comment from Maita. Thank you. Yes, definitely courage. So at this point, here we are again in an exercise of in intuition over structure, because I've come to this session again without any notes, without an agenda, without much in the way of pre-formulated questions. So I'm just going to take a moment to pause and see what direction we're going to head in next. And while I do this, perhaps I invite you to take a few breaths too. So I want to speak to an idea that I've heard from a few people about relative levels of love and lovingness in a relating. Because one of the first things I often hear people say at the concept of open relating is that somehow it's more loving to focus solely on one person, and that if you bring in multiple other people, then the love that you embody, the love that you can give, becomes somehow diluted. And I want to speak to that particular idea first and foremost, because it's a really important thing, I think, to be aware of if you want to step into open relating, and just in general in life, I feel. So it can happen. It's possible, depending on where a person is at in terms of how much they love themselves, in terms of how resourced they are, all these different aspects of self-care that enable us to walk around with enough energy, basically, to stay upright, to stay in communication, to not shut down. So it's a very important thing to be aware of. And it's an important thing to know for anybody who's thinking of getting into open relating out of some misguided sense of wanting to have multiple partners, out of just wanting to have lots of sex with different people, because it definitely pays to come into this thing with your eyes open and to have good and high intentions for those that you're going to be in a relating with. So from where I'm at in my experience with open relating, I can say that I've never had simultaneously more than 2 people that I've been in a relating with. That's not to say that I have any particular personal limit, but I'm absolutely not in open relating just to have many, many different partners, or just to practice promiscuity or anything like that. And so the thing to really focus in on is, first of all, to love and care for yourself deeply, first and foremost. And the analogy I like to use is that you fill yourself with love so much that effortlessly it's just overflowing from your being, and it's just falling on the people and the environment around you and giving nourishment. It's not something that's being forcefully pushed out. It's not something that requires a massive amount of effort. When you are loving on yourself so much and so regularly that it all just overflows, there's a real ease to it. And there's quite a stark difference, if you really pay attention, when you're in that mode of loving, of being loving, and when you're in another mode which is more to do with, oh, I have to be loving, I feel like I should do this. You're kind of pushing lovingness out from your being rather than letting it just flow naturally. So the first thing to speak to is all of the acts of self-care, all of the acts of self-love that we really should do, so that we're walking around holding ourselves, wrapping our arms around ourselves first and foremost, and coming from a place of fullness rather than from a place of lack. And it's something to be very aware of as well when you're considering taking another partner in open relating. To really ask yourself honestly, do I have the capacity within me to broaden the recipients of my intimate love, of my affection? Because if the answer to that is no, or if there's any doubt, then it's really not a responsible thing to do, to invite somebody else in when you're not resourced enough to be loving with yourself, to be loving with one other person, and then let alone be loving with 2 other people. Now, the other aspect of this question is that somehow, if you love one person, truly, deeply love one person, then that should be enough, that your focus should just be on that one person, and for you to then go looking for anything else elsewhere isn't a loving thing to do. Or even for you to allow or even encourage your partner to explore other realms of connection and possibility, that is somehow a contortion of love, that somehow isn't truly loving. And through my experience with open relating, I feel like it really is a higher calling in your capacity to love when you feel so deeply connected and loving towards one person, but at the same time you're allowing them to go and explore possibility and connection with other people. It's like saying, I feel so much love in myself. I feel so full of love, and I love you so deeply that in no way am I going to attempt to take possession of you or to inhibit or limit you in any way in responding to any potential new connection, any way in which your spirit and your energy is telling you that person over there or that situation is something to go and explore, is something to inquire into. And it's something I hear expressed quite regularly from people who are outside the world of open relating, who perhaps have never experienced it. That somehow the very idea of open relating speaks to a lack or deficiency in true love for the other person. Whereas for me, it's the complete opposite. It speaks to a willingness to be of love, to give and receive love, but actively set up a structure in which there is freedom for yourself and the other person. That you're not looking to take possession. You can claim. It's a beautiful dynamic to play with, to claim a partner at any given moment. But there's a softness to it. There's an understanding that it's not a vice-like grip. It's just perhaps for a period of time while you're together. It's just perhaps for a few hours making love or something like that. But the energy of claiming within a sexual dynamic is a very potent one and a very interesting one to experiment with. And this other idea that somehow there is a finite amount of love that we can embody, that we can give and receive. And for some, yes, that is the case, especially, as I mentioned, if you're entering a kind of dynamic where you're pushing love out. It's something that involves effort, and you're doing it out of a sense of expectation. You're trying to be a good person. You're trying to do something. But if the focus is more on loving so much on yourself that you are overflowing with love, and as you move through the world, it's just sloshing here and sloshing there and just nourishing the ground that you're walking on. That's the kind of ideal to approach open relating with, I feel. Maita, thank you so much for being on the video, and thank you for your comments. So the question that's been asked is, how does it feel to live with that part of unknown in the life of your partner? So I mentioned before that my preference when I'm in an open relating with somebody is, well, I say to people that I'm in an open relating with, I don't necessarily need to know if and when you're interested in somebody new, when you take a new lover. I don't particularly want to know. You don't have to tell me as a matter of course. But I'm here if there's anything that you want to speak about, if you feel to share, if you feel like it would be of benefit to you, or it's just something that you want to express, then absolutely I'm open to that. And what I've found through this approach is that what typically happens is that these bits of information will come out naturally and organically at a particular moment. And I think it's important that with that kind of preference of mine, and just in general, just through the regular course of conversation and sharing and intimacy, sometimes these things get touched upon naturally. In fact, in my experience, more often than not, they get touched upon naturally. And so my partner, or hypothetically a partner, has the opportunity to share that bit of information as and when it naturally arises, rather than coming from a place of, I've entered into a new relating with somebody, therefore I have to go and tell my partner because it's an agreement that we have. And so in my experience with all of the partners that I've had, well, I suppose as far as I'm aware, perhaps I wouldn't know, but I'm pretty sure that with all of the partners that I've had, I have been told, I have at some point been made aware that somebody else has come into their life and they're exploring connection with somebody else. But the thing that is better for me in this way of doing it is that for me it's a lot simpler, and it allows a lot more for the natural flow of things rather than a more structure-based, structure-led approach. So some people might want to have an agreement whereby if somebody new comes on the scene, they want to be told about it. And some people might have an agreement, and for me this was true in one case as well, that the partner needs to be told before you start having sex with somebody that somebody new is on the scene. And I've had this work both ways, actually. I've had this be the case where I had to honour that rule and a partner of mine had to honour that rule. And the feedback that we both felt, that we both gave each other, was actually that sort of checkpoint, that sort of bit of structure just put in there, interrupted what was actually quite a beautiful and natural organic flow of things. So it's like you're exploring intimacy with somebody new, and perhaps, for example, say you're on a date or you're on a walk and you've only met a few times, and you really feel that this connection is leading somewhere, and you really feel to kiss, or you really feel to make love or something like that, but you have to recall, you have to stop, come out of the moment, go back to your structure and your agreements and go, oh no, actually I can't, because I've got to go and tell my partner, or I've got to tell my partner before we do anything like this that this is what we're doing. And that is a little bit jarring in my experience. Personally, I'd much rather be able to, in all things really, but in this example as well, be able to move in a way that my energy and my spirit is moving me in, without needing to suddenly abruptly stop and divert and go in a different direction because I've got an agreement that I need to honour with somebody else. It's far better for me to be able to move in the way that spirit and energy are moving me. And that's what I would like for people that I'm in a relating with too. So this particular area of agreement changed for me, because I did come at it from a very I did come at it from a very structured, rigorous, what feels now like a very mental way of engaging with open relating. I wanted to create structures, I wanted to create many different checks and balances almost within the open relating, so that I knew what was going on, and I had a lot of questions, all of these things where my mind was just latching onto things all over the place. And so over time, these things have loosened a bit. And so with the question, how does it feel to live with the potential unknowns in the life of your partner? Honestly, with this kind of thing, a lot of the time, ignorance is bliss. It's really important to understand why you would want to know what's going on in these areas of your partner's life. Now, for some people, that why might just be they feel a general sense of ease, they feel a general sense of contentment and lovingness, and a moment arises of curiosity, or playfulness or whatever it is. And they might then want to question, they might then want to ask, like, are you seeing anybody else? Or I know that you're seeing anybody else, but how is it going for you? Is there anything you feel like sharing? So for me, the way I like to approach it is having the area of unknown, having it be as big as it can be, really. And then at certain interesting, heightened, more sensitized moments, then just potentially dipping in and asking a few questions, leaning into that vulnerability a little bit, leaning into that edginess a little bit, feeling how it lands, taking in that information and letting it percolate, letting it just do its thing. And that for me, again, is a much more natural, organic way of being and relating with somebody, rather than having lots of rigidity and structure that says, I need to go and tell my partner when I am interested in somebody else. I need to go and tell them when I start dating. I need to tell them before I have sex. And we need to check in every 2 weeks with an agenda of what's going on with other partners. So over time, for me, simplicity has become the watchword. And a lot of the structures that I put in place early on have fallen somewhat by the wayside. I do still have agreements. It's this funny in-between space where some people might expect there to be lots of communication, lots of agreements around that, and then there's the free love side of things where everyone's like, there should be no agreements, there should be nothing, you should be able to just do whatever you want whenever you want. And of course, somewhere between those two things lies balance, and the point at which you land between those two things is going to be very particular and specific to each individual. And that's the real thing to remember, is that in any of this there is no right or wrong. There is no better or worse between one person's model or another, even between conventional monogamous relating, polyamory, open relating. As long as there is an intention to be loving, as long as there are good and high intentions for what is taking place, and there is no intentional harm being done, then it all just comes down to how we are uniquely expressing ourselves as individual focus points of divinity. So again, I'm going to take another moment just to pause, take a few breaths, because I feel like there is perhaps a little more to say on this topic of communication, and particularly this idea of the unknown aspects of what's happening, because that can be that can be food for the mind. So yes, when you are in an open relating, even potentially when your lover, your partner isn't seeing anybody else, but there's all this potentiality, you know you've stepped into something where you've left things wide open for your partner to be out in the world, not necessarily looking for that connection, but open to connection with somebody new. And that does create a lot of unknown. That does inherently have a lot of potentiality. And one really good principle, almost a mantra really, that I have come across during this whole process, particularly to do with this aspect, this idea that my partner is out in the world, is potentially connecting with other people, or in instances where I know my partner has another lover and Today they could be spending time together. This evening they could be on a date. Anything could be happening. And it's exactly these kinds of themes that the mind quite often likes to take a hold of and embellish. And the mind, in all of its wonderful creativity, will come up with all kinds of stories as to what could be going on. But a simple way to cut through that, like coming back to the breath in a moment of meditation, is just to say something simple like, it has nothing to do with me. The connection that my partner is exploring with somebody else, whatever might be happening, all of this unknown, it has nothing to do with me. It has no grounding in my current reality whatsoever. It's not in my body. It's not in my felt sense experience of where I am, what I am, and what's happening around me. It's not observable in my immediate environment. I can't see it. I can't hear it. It's way out there in the realms of mind. So it has nothing to do with me. It has nothing to do with my present experience of life, other than my mind is attempting to tell me a story, is attempting to fantasize, is attempting to drag me off into the future, a hypothetical future. Now, I find this process that I've described, this awareness of what's going on in these kinds of situations, is hugely beneficial, has been hugely beneficial for my ability to observe the mind, my ability to hit the reset button on the mind in many, many different ways. Because through years of different habits, many different factors, the mind can really be a pain in the ass. So any new ways in which we learn to interrupt the mind and to pattern interrupt, because that's essentially what's playing out here. It's a new situation in which the mind can do what it has habitually done for a long, long time, which is try to point out all of the difficulty, try to point out all of the suffering, try to point out all the what could go wrongs. And so when you put yourself into an environment of open relating, where there is all of this potentiality that I keep mentioning, it's just another playground really for your mind to enter into and go, okay, what sort of chaos can I create in this environment, which is an even more heightened and intense environment than I've been in regular relationships or most other aspects of my life. How much shit can I throw around in this space, the mind might say. And that is a gift. It goes hand in hand with this idea that to transform something, sometimes it's beneficial to lean a lot more into that thing. It's like you feel mildly pissed off about something, and so you decide that you're gonna go to the coast and you're gonna shout and scream and F and blind at the sea. And in doing that, you amplify and amplify and amplify that energy until it's so heightened, it's so intense that it flips and it becomes the opposite. And after all of that anger, you get a deep felt sense of peace and love and connectedness because the energy's been allowed to move, it's been allowed to express. So those little habits and those little patterns of the mind that are then able to do their thing with this more intense environment of open relating, they're more likely to then amplify, to be noticed, to be brought into awareness, and you can then lean and lean and lean into them until they flip. So, for example, while on one hand, within this theme of the unknown and open relating, your mind might be telling you, okay, my partner's definitely with somebody else. They're out for dinner, they're making love, they're doing all these things. Oh my God, it feels so difficult in my body when I think of these things. There's just so much suffering I associate with it. Oh, but this person must be all kinds of this, that, and the other. The comparisons are coming out. Because there is that potentiality, because it is a more heightened and intense environment than we might experience in regular relating, you get to go through all of those processes. You get to look at all the ways in which the mind is trying to throw shit around. And you get to transform them a lot faster than you might if you'd kept yourself in a more comfortable space for a longer period of your life. So I've talked a bit about how in the first 3 months or so, 6 months or so of being in open relating, my partner wasn't with anybody else. But the amount to which my mind was trying to generate suffering, to tell stories, to seek reassurance, to fact find, to deconstruct, to analyze, to judge, all the things that the left hemisphere of the mind loves to do, was just an overdrive. And it was difficult to find peace. But that process was perhaps 6 months of the most valuable and rewarding internal work I've ever done in my life. And so extrapolate that over 3.5 years now for me of open relating, where there have been a number of partners at various points, and my partners have explored the container of open relating, have brought other people in. And so the deep, deep internal processes that get called upon through this style of relating are immensely beneficial and transformative. And so to circle back around, I've come to a point now where the unknown is actually okay. The unknown is fine because it doesn't have anything to do with me. It's not happening in my immediate vicinity. It's not happening right in front of me. It's not something I can see. It's just a fantasy, almost. Because I don't know what's going on. I don't know what it's like unless my partner feels to come and tell me. And like I said, that door is open if it is of benefit. And I think that, to add another point to that, saying that you don't want to know, that you don't need to know, but the door is open if your partner feels to share, if there's a process going on, if they want some assistance, some help, some support. That, for me, instills in the other person a process by which they check their why. Why do I want to bring this to Harry? What is my intention in sharing this? And so it helps that person to really check in with why it is they want to bring this bit of information. Is it because they need assistance? Is it because they want help, love, support? Is it just out of a sense of finding something to talk about? Is it somehow idle, almost gossip? So yeah, it really helps them tune in very deeply with what their intention is in coming with that information. So, Maita, thank you for the conversation. So Maita says, I guess it requires a huge amount of self-regulating and authenticity, as well as commitment to connect and love. Yeah, for sure. I think the self-regulating aspect is particularly important for me because I've witnessed and observed in my own life, in my history of relationships, how sometimes in relationships we actually outsource our ability to self-regulate, to self-care, to hold ourselves, because you've got somebody else that you're in a deep, profound connection with, and somehow you feel a little bit of wavering, you feel a little bit of discomfort or unease, and you can just go to that person and you can hold them and they can hold you, and it feels a lot better. Of course it does. And that can and does still happen in open relating, of course. But in those situations where your partner has taken another lover and is elsewhere, it encourages you time and time again to look within yourself. First of all, to hold your own hand and to love and support yourself while you go through that difficult process of, oh my God, my partner, this person that I have so much love and affection for, is being intimate, giving and receiving pleasure with somebody else, connecting with somebody else. It helps you to look deeper at what's really going on there. Why is that a problem? And it might be that themes of abandonment come up. It might be that feelings, latent subconscious feelings of not being enough, not being worthy, come up. Any manner of things. And there are many different textures and varieties to the things that come up when you're put in that sort of situation. But it turns your attention inwards. It helps you to locate those things within yourself. So perhaps on one occasion it'll feel like a removal of love. Your mind might try and say, if this person is going and exploring intimacy with somebody else, then they can't love me. There must be something that's gone wrong and they've withdrawn their love for me. You then get to go through that experience and delve within and locate that love that you've put onto that other person being a source of. You can then locate it within yourself and amplify it within yourself. Provide it for yourself first and foremost. So that, again, to use that analogy, we're all moving around in this beautiful space where everyone is full to the brim with love that they've identified and cultivated within themselves. And so when you come into contact with somebody who has done a similar thing and is as full of love, as able to give and receive love, the realms of possibility in terms of intimacy, in terms of pleasure, in terms of connection, just go through the roof. Because neither person is looking to extract something from the other. Neither person is saying, I need you to love me so that I can feel whole, because you are already whole. And yeah, the authenticity that Maita speaks to in that comment, it really emboldens you and strengthens you. It shows you how to be courageous in who you are and how you want to move. And a big part of that process, which again is facilitated beautifully through the container of open relating, is for a moment put yourself in the position of somebody who's in an open relating and has perhaps spent the first 6 months going through this process of all the potentiality, all the insecurity, all the unsureness, And in that space, there isn't really the capacity to think about taking another partner, to actually exploring the possibilities that are available to you through open relating. But then you arrive at a point where all of a sudden a curiosity arrives in you, a sudden realization that, okay, I can approach other people, I can speak to other people, I can express attraction to other people. That is allowed, even encouraged within the space of this relationship. And so you go and do that for the first time. That act in itself takes a lot of courage, because the way in which we've been taught and conditioned to think around relationships is that if you're with somebody, to express interest in somebody else is wrong. That's immoral. It's shameful, greedy, whatever you want to call it. Many, many ways in which we're taught and conditioned into feeling automatically guilt and shame around expressing attraction for somebody when you're already in a relating. But that's what's real for you. Even in situations where you're in a conventional relationship and you feel an attraction, you feel drawn by somebody else, again, that's what's real for you. And so to be able to express that, to be able to move in the way that that energy is attempting to move you, that is the authenticity that Maita speaks to in that comment. And being courageous in your authenticity is immensely beneficial, very, very potent and transformative practice. Very edgy. And again, through open relating, you get to explore that in ways that were perhaps shut down in you before. So if anybody else currently watching feels to ask a question, I've spoken a little bit to the comments that Maita's put up, and thank you again, Maita, for being here and for engaging so openly. Really appreciate it. So I'll take another moment to pause and go internal, and we'll see if there's anything further to cover as we approach the hour mark. I feel like I don't want to say last thing because who knows, but one of the closing things to say is that I've talked a little bit about different agreements that people might have in place, different rules and structures that can be introduced into open relating based on each individual's personal preference. But I feel like pointing out again the impermanence of all things and just highlighting to everybody that in all things we are autonomous, sovereign, free beings. We have the freedom to express ourselves, we have the freedom to move in whatever direction we feel to move in. And so with any of these kinds of structures and frameworks and agreements and anything else, they are just guidelines. They are just ideas based on an individual's awareness of their own personal preferences and everything else. So situations may sometimes arise when, for whatever reason, an agreement is contravened. And again, for me, the thing to come back to in this is the authenticity and the courage to communicate to a partner if and when that happens. And I say this because it is a high ideal of open relating that you are giving more freedom to your partner and you are enjoying more freedom yourself in how you move through the world. What is available to you, what is possible to you, all the different flavors and textures and qualities of connection. And it's up to each one of us as individuals in this sense to feel deeply if and when something like that happens, if and when a partner crosses one of these borders, because they're free to do so, of course. People can do largely whatever they like. So it comes back to a question of integrity in yourself. And understanding why you had that agreement in place in the first place, what its role, what its purpose was, what its function was, whether you can understand, empathize why in this particular instance that rule was crossed, and just how willing you are to perhaps change it or disregard what happened or forgive and move on. So it comes down to a question of integrity in yourself, authenticity in expressing yourself, communicating your perspective of what's gone on, and arriving at a place of understanding just how willing you are to compromise in that particular area. And again, it comes back to this idea of self-love. If something like that happens and you find yourself all too willing, all too quick to forgive and forget, then it's possible that something within that process is being led too much by a strong wish or a desire just to maintain the intimacy and maintain the connection regardless of this instance of transgression. So it's a real deep question to ask yourself. And this is true in conventional relationships too. I think that it's probably quite a common experience that we have all had at some point, where an agreement in a relationship has been breached, and suddenly we're in this place of, this thing could fall apart, this thing could just dissolve. And just watching the process that you go through to decide whether or not it's worth fixing and maintaining and changing or compromising or whatever, or extricating yourself from that situation. And in those processes, it's worth coming back to again and again that the primary recipient of your love should be yourself. Because how on earth can you be loving with other people if you're not actively, daily, minute by minute, decision by decision, being loving to yourself? So yeah, it really does come back to a commitment to connect and love. Now I can see at the moment we have 3 viewers and we've just reached the hour mark. I feel like if anybody has one more question, then I have the energy, the time to answer it. If not, then we'll call an end here. But I'll give a moment or two for anything to arise, as always. Okay, well it seems like nothing further has come up unless there's a question being formulated now. So I feel like that's a good point to close. So what I'll say at this point is that with this subject and with many other subjects, I am available to work with you, to help you through your process as a coach, as a mentor. So if you feel a connection, if you feel that would be of benefit, then get in touch. You can message me on Facebook, you can email me, harry@humanrewild.net. So this has been the second in what will be a series of these kinds of sessions on a variety of topics. I felt to delve into open relating as it was the first thing that I found myself writing about as I started to share on this subject. And the theme will be sex and relationships going forward. So there'll be another topic that I'm going to announce at some point tomorrow. And yeah, there will be another of this style of webinar, sharing, live video coming up soon. So particular thanks to Maita for all of your engagement. It's really great to be in connection with you through the course of this video. Thank you so much, and thank you everybody else. That's it. I will see you next time on Human Rewild. Have a great evening everybody, with utmost love and gratitude. Ciao ciao.